Data protection and privacy teams are under more pressure than ever with new laws, AI oversight, data breaches, and the constant expectation to do more with fewer resources.
That's why TrustArc built a modern privacy and data protection management platform powered by Arc Intelligence. It unifies your tools, automates the work that slows you down, and surfaces what matters most right when you need it.
From guided quick actions to our intelligent assistant, Ask Arc, you get credible, contextual answers backed by expert research, not generic AI guesses.
Finally, privacy that works the way privacy pros work.
Learn how TrustArc helps teams move faster with confidence at trustarc.com/serious-privacy. That's trustarc.com/serious-privacy.
You're listening to the award-winning Serious Privacy podcast sponsored by TrustArc. Please welcome your hosts, Paul Breitbart, Ralph O'Brien, and Dr. Kay Royal.
Have you heard of drop? As a Dutchman, my main association actually is licorice, which translates into Dutch as drop. As a music lover, I think of a dance floor, but as a data protection professional, drop of course stands for the Delete Request and Opt-out Platform, a platform developed by the California Privacy Protection Agency to support individual rights requests. Drop was launched on the 1st of January of this year, and here to discuss the platform with us is returning guest Tom Kemp, the Executive Director of CPPA. Before, we spoke to him about his book on containing big tech, but since close to a year, he actually runs the California Data Protection Act Authority and is containing big tech in practice. My name is Paul Breitbart.
My name is Ralph O'Brien.
And I'm Kay Royal, and welcome to Serious Privacy. And yes, Tom, thank you once again for coming back on the show. We really appreciate it. You're in quite a different role now, so that's going to make for a great conversation.
Thank you for having me. It's a good sign that you're actually asked back, so I'll take that as a compliment.
We actually made sure we waited to have you back. We didn't want to inundate you with invitations with all the other scads of invitations I think you probably got. Let's jump into the unexpected question. This is great timing. How is a mermaid born? Egg or born live?
Okay. I think I'll field that to give Tom a moment to answer. Of all the unexpected questions we have, I think these are really unexpected.
I told you we're going overboard this season. Here we go.
I think my answer is mermaids are born of the imagination. But I understand, inspired by the manatee. So in which case, I would have to go biological evolution of a sea cow. There you go.
You spoil all my fun, Ralph. Paul, what about you? What do you think?
You don't want to insult anybody.
All right, I really can't blame y'all. Tom, where are you going with this one?
Oh my goodness. I have to take my official regulator hat off because you never know that down the road we may have to regulate mermaids. So I am speaking in my own personal capacity. I think they're born.
I'm going with you, Tom. I think they're born.
On that, there was a fine in the UK on an organization called Mermaids that's a
So there we go. You could regulate mermaids at some point, Tom. You're in California. Y'all are about to fall off in the ocean and be your own island. So who knows? There could be mermaids hiding around California somewhere.
Absolutely. We represent, as part of this agency, we represent all Californians with fins or no fins. So
Kemp, a huge change since the last time we had you on. Last time we were talking about your books, about all the work you've done previously. So I guess before we get into the specifics, I think the first question I have for you is, what's it like to be the executive director of the first data protection and privacy regulator in the US of A?
It's great. And first and foremost, I get to work with great people.
Yeah.
And so I've historically been a Silicon Valley founder, executive, et cetera. And the quality of folks that we have here in the agency is just on par, if not better than what I've experienced in Silicon Valley. Obviously a different mission. In Silicon Valley, the focus is getting the big IPO. Here, it's serving Californians. So it's been a great transition working here at the agency and trying to do right by the people of California. So I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed working with the people. They're incredible. And the thing is that when you work at a tech company or any business, the ability to affect change for millions of people is not necessarily as significant as being in a government role
Right.
where you can launch something like the delete request and opt-out platform, or you can influence and sponsor legislation that requires browsers to add a global privacy control, what we call here in California, an opt-out preference signal in the browser. So the ability to do good by the folks of Californians, 40 million of us right here, is super exciting. And it's just the level of impact that you can have in this type of role is amazing.
It's fantastic.
So, Tom, what surprised you most about, I think you're a civil servant now, right? As we would call it in Europe. What surprised you most coming from the private sector, becoming a civil servant?
I've always had a great deal of respect for civil servants. And I actually worked for a school district after my company got acquired. So I was actually a coach of a varsity team, athletic team for a year or so. And also my grandparents were school teachers, et cetera. The surprise is, again, goes back to just the level of commitment that people have and some really smart people. I think that oftentimes, especially being in Silicon Valley, where I live and I worked for 30 years, is that we think that we have here in Silicon Valley a monopoly of intelligence and really smart, being really smart, and the ability to make change and things of that nature as well. And what I found is that there's really dedicated people in the public sector, some of which could easily work in Silicon Valley, but they just have a different agenda that maybe going for the IPO is not the thing for them that they want to serve. And having been in raising money from some of the top VCs and here in Silicon Valley in a former life and working with super smart people at various startups, I started my career at Oracle. And now being in the public sector here, there's really smart people on both sides. And I have a great deal of respect for what the work people do here in California to try to improve the lives of our fellow residents.
It's a calling, Tom. Let's be honest. It's a calling, right?
Absolutely.
And I will tell you that once you took leadership, I almost moved back to California.
I'll take that as a compliment. So we've actually had a net increase in population since I started here, shall we?
There we go.
Yeah, the surveys of U-Haul show a net add. No, I'm just joking.
It's okay. I think I just found the title, The Kemp Effect.
Kemp Effect. Actually, no, California has had an increase in population in the last year or so. We had people leave during COVID, but we're now getting a net influx coming in.
Tom, you mentioned 40 million Californians. Actually, I'd like to extend that because we're all consumers of Californian technology. I was speaking to you here from London or just outside London. And obviously, all of our consumers over here use all of those tech platforms that are based in California. So actually, as the Californian regulator, when you pass a rule, when you pass a law, that actually has a ripple effect that is going to pass across the globe. We talk about 40 million Californians, but I'm really interested in looking at some of the things you're doing as a model for elsewhere. You mentioned DROP and the global privacy signal as well. So perhaps you could start there and talk about DROP, because I imagine, because from what I've seen online, that's fascinating.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely right that on a number of fronts, first and foremost, one of the biggest industries here in California, by the way, we're the fourth largest economy in the world. We've moved up from fifth to fourth. And that happened in the
Nicely
last...
done.
Yeah, but it has nothing to do with me, but somehow there's that Kemp effect happening. No, I'm just completely joking there. So we obviously regulate some of the largest companies in the world because they're in the data economy and a lot of their data involves personal information.
Yeah.
The thing that really I've always really cared about and what really appealed to me about taking this position was that we all, not we, but people in California, but also folks in Europe, we have privacy rights. But what good are having those rights if they're very difficult to exercise? And so one of the big areas of focus for me was, can we make privacy easier? Can we reduce friction? And so people can really have control over how their personal information is being used. And we're approaching this in a couple of ways. The first way, of course, is through the drop system. That's the delete request and opt-out platform.
Yes.
That was brought forth by the Delete Act. And that really involves third-party data and the ability for consumers to go to a single website and say, look, I want to have my data deleted. I want to be opted out of these entities that I don't have a direct relationship with. The other aspect is with first-party data is how can you, in a scalable manner, tell first-party entities that you do interact with that please don't sell or share my information? And that's where the opt-out preference signal comes in. But the issue that we had there was that by default, most browsers didn't have it in the box. Or yes, and in theory, you could add a third-party extension to your browser. But the issue was that on mobile, third-party plugins were not supported on those browsers as well. And so over the last year, we've delivered the drop system. I can talk more about that. And then we had AB 566, the California Opt Me Out Act, that will require on January 1st, 2027, browser vendors to add the switch, the toggle for that. And yes, I think that this will be heavily influential for the rest of the world, because I don't think browser vendors will want to offer multiple versions of browsers, one for Californians, one for the rest of the United States. And I think in the case of drop, I think other people are going to say in other states, well, like, why don't I have that? And there'll be pressure on politicians to deliver something comparable to what we have here in California.
Yeah. I do want to hear more about drop.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I've often taken the point, if technology is the problem, perhaps technology can be the answer. People often talk about data protection and privacy as regulation versus innovation, or privacy versus functionality. And I'm a big fan of saying you can have your cake and eat it. Your data protection can be added as functionality to your product to give people their rights. And what I think fascinates me about things like drop is the regulator is hosting it. You talk to the regulator, and then the regulator goes and contacts people and says, "Oi, delete their data, get rid of the information, opt them out." That it was decided that this is something that, your agency would have to front?
Yeah, no, there's a lot of paths that eventually led to the drop system being delivered. The one path was the passage of the California Consumer Privacy Act, which was amended in 2020 with Proposition 24, the California Privacy Rights Act. And what that did was that allowed to have a privacy law that set a high floor that enabled politicians to add on to it and not allowing privacy to drop in. So what has happened over the last 5-6 years in California is that legislators see the CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act, as a big Lego piece, and they're now trying to snap things onto it. Then there was a second kind of pass that led to this drop system, is that people were very concerned about what data brokers were doing. Tim Cook, of all people, in 2019 wrote an editorial in Time magazine saying, hey, we should really have this data broker clearinghouse, allow people to be able to initiate deletion at scale. Senator Wyden had proposed something before that. And then at the federal level, you had Senator Ossoff, a Democrat, and Senator Cassidy, Republican, actually proposed the Delete Act, a federal version of that. But that hasn't gotten anywhere. And what happened in 2023, I talked to my local state Senator Becker and said, hey, this is a great idea. We should do it here in California, and we should move what was in place, a data broker registry, to the California Privacy Protection Agency, which I'm going to call Cal Privacy from now on, and then add this accessible deletion mechanism that has been proposed by other people as well. So the delete request and opt-out platform came because of legislation. So we're not building this just because we think we need it as an agency. We're following the law. And the nice thing is that the Lego blocks were in place with the CCPA amended by the CPRA, the Delete Act, which had previously a data broker registry, that got us to the point right now that, and it was mandated by law that we had to deliver this on January 1st. And let me tell you that the level of response has been incredible. In basically 2 weeks, we had over 150,000 Californians sign up for this. That's like almost 10,000 a day. And they also know that the deletions won't start kicking in until the August and beyond.
August 1st, right?
Yeah. So there is a gap right there, but people were like, just put me in the system right now. And so I want to make sure I get deleted as well. So that really tells me that there is a hunger out there for privacy. Now, it's very interesting. A lot of people talk about this privacy paradox where they say consumers talk a good game about privacy, but they don't do anything. And from my perspective, that it's because privacy is too hard for people to exercise. And what we're trying to do through legislation and implementation of laws is to try to fundamentally make privacy easier and enable privacy at scale, much like the tech companies collect our information at scale. And eventually, I think that because more and more AI is happening, I think there'll probably be third-party products out there in a privacy ecosystem that will help you, that will use AI to help people from a privacy perspective. So we're just part of this evolution of enabling consumers to be able to fully exercise and take advantage of their rights. And there's a fundamental hunger for people to do that, as witnessed by 9.3 million people voted here in California for Prop 24. That's an incredible number. The fact that I think 70-80% of the people turn on app tracking transparency in iOS, and the fact that we're now seeing thousands and tens of thousands and over 100,000 people here in California signing up for the drop system.
Yeah.
Love the idea of drop, and I fully appreciate that it's part of a legislative requirement. That's why you've developed it. But why was this considered to be something that a government authority should do instead of leaving it to the market? Companies all across the world, under data protection laws all across the world, are used to dealing with individual rights requests. And I don't believe there is any other government-run system to deal with deletion and opt-out requests. So why not leave it to the market?
I think that the issue is that you also need a set of regulations to define what is required by the data brokers. And then you also need enforcement as well. And so you need the carrot and also the stick to make sure that people are actually deleting it. And the cool thing is that the legislation, SB 362, that was authored by State Senator Becker, and it was amended just last year with SB 361, again, both were signed by Governor Newsom, is that there is robust enforcement fines associated with it. There's robust transparency required. So it's not only just like the deletion, it's also the registration and having these third parties actually say, here's the type of data that we collect, et cetera, and provide more granularity. So it's really just about overall regulating the industry in a much more robust way than you could actually get if you just left it to having a generic law where saying people have the right to delete, but how do you actually go about that at scale? So it's a scale issue. And in this case, it did require government action. And part of the scale issue is having the rules of the road with regulation, having a registry, and then having enforcement as well. And so that's how it all led here, California offering this. But you're absolutely right. No one else is doing something at this level in terms of deletion. We have in the United States, we have the FTC's do not call registry, but that's an opt-out.
Mm-hmm.
But this here is actual a deletion mechanism, and it makes it very unique.
Well, I have one more question, re-drop, and that immediately also broadens our discussion, because I would like to know if you envisage somewhere in the near future expanding drop to non-Californians so that Europeans or South Carolinians or Washingtonians could actually make similar requests under California law. So basically also expanding the scope of the CCPA.
And you're talking about, let me just see if I understand this. You're not saying it because you think California should regulate everywhere else, but everyone who interacts with the California regulated entities should be allowed to do this.
Exactly.
A couple of things. So first of all, it's really nice and neat to actually see California envy on the social media networks right there, not just because of our weather, but because of our government, right? And it's nice to see on the social media postings that people from outside of California saying, I wish I had this as well.
Right.
And so what I'm really hoping that next Thanksgiving, when Californians meet with their relatives from out of state, and then the usual conversation comes about dissing California, because that's people like to kick California, that I'm hoping that the residents will whip out their phone and say, but we have drop, you don't have this. And then there's silence right there. So yes, this definitely represents an example of how you can innovate from a policy perspective and really make a difference, because this is a pain point that people have, that they're tired of having their information, these digital dossiers being bought and sold to anyone with a credit card, and having their information all over the internet. And they want some control to be able to start having the process of trying to reduce their overall footprint that they have out there with third-party entities. So this is a big step forward in that. What we have heard is that legislators from other states have said, I want that for my residents. And we have publicly said at various Cal Privacy board meetings that we would entertain conversations of how we could collaborate with other jurisdictions. That's allowed for us to do as part of our statute here in California, that we have a policy ledge team that works with other states and make sure that there's harmonization of privacy laws. And so we are very open to having conversations about partnering with other states that deliver and enable this for their residents as well. And there have been people, for example, State Senator Maroney in Connecticut has explicitly called for that. There is a proposal in Vermont for the Delete Act. There have in the past been proposals in Nebraska and Illinois for delete acts. And so we're more than happy as a state regulator to have the conversations with attorney generals, secretary of states, legislators. Actually, Governor Hochul in New York has actually called for something comparable to this as well. And then it's been mentioned in Massachusetts legislation. So we're open for these conversations. So if there's any people in other states that want this, they should talk to their legislators. And if any legislators or policy people affiliated with the state entities want to have a conversation, more than happy to have that conversation. And of course, I urge any of your listeners that are Californians, go to privacy.ca.gov and sign up for it today.
We do have a number of Californian listeners, and we were actually looking at the statistics just before Christmas of where people sign up. And we do have a truly global audience, which is fantastic, but a significant number of Californians who are interested in tech policy as well. I was going to ask, and Kay was saying, where are you going next? But looking at you as sort of a state regulator, you've then got the federal level, and you've then got the international level. Over here in Europe and the UK, we've got people like the European Data Protection Board. We have teams of regulators that are quite experienced now who have been operating at country level, and then there's a European level. There's things like the GPA, the Global Privacy Assembly. So I think my question is slightly more of a personal one in terms of, so what's it like being the first state regulator in the US? What's the relationship like with the federal level? What's the relationship like with other regulators or attorney generals? So how do you operate and trailblaze as that first regulator within that federal system?
Yeah, from a historical perspective, when the CCPA was passed, it was the attorney general that was the regulator, and then that flipped to an independent agency with the passage of Prop 24. The California Attorney General still has enforcement over the CCPA, as does us. So it's a dual enforcement, but we're responsible for the regulations. And then the statute also requires us to do the policy legislation to work with obviously work with California legislators, but also in other jurisdictions. So we actually, by statute, can and should and are required to make sure that there's harmonization of privacy rights, which would advantage Californians. And then we also have a public affairs division here to evangelize about privacy, to raise privacy literacy among Californians. That's why we've heavily invested in privacy.ca.gov. Not only does it host the drop system, but it has a bunch of tips. So absolutely, it's exciting to work with other entities. And one thing that we've done is we've helped spearhead this consortium of privacy regulators. And now we have over 10 state attorney generals that are part of this. And so we have regular meetings in which we collaborate and discuss enforcement related issues and as well as potential regulatory areas that need to be focused on. So the goal is of this consortium of privacy regulators is to provide harmonization across the different state laws. And I'm very proud to say that there hasn't been an enforcement action here in California that wouldn't also be an enforcement action in Indiana or Connecticut or now Minnesota, et cetera, and vice versa. So there is a consistency in terms of the enforcement of the state privacy laws that people may not be aware of. Furthermore, we do interact with like ICO, CNIL, the South Korean data protection authorities. So we do collaborate, share best practices for the benefit of Californians, but we also like telling people what we're doing because we're one of the first to do this. And then at the federal level, clearly we've interfaced and interacted with the FTC, the FCC, but also with federal lawmakers to make sure that they're aware of the cutting edge work that we're doing. What we oftentimes see is that if there's a federal proposal, it's almost from 5, 6, 7 years ago because they don't realize this Lego block building that we've been doing in California. So it's very important for us to make sure people are aware of what the state of the art is, which really, for the most part, is happening here in California. Not to say that there hasn't been some great innovation in other places, but the majority, like the drop system, like the Opt-Me-Out Act that requires browsers to have that, and other examples of that. So it's great to be able to interact with other entities, raise awareness, ensure consistency of enforcement. And then we also learn from people as well. So there's just a hunger out there for other people to collaborate, other regulators to collaborate with each other. And we're more than happy to help facilitate that.
It's okay. Back to you, because both Ralph and I overruled your question.
Yeah, we did overrule your question, Kate. So please.
I may be outnumbered quite frequently, so that's okay. Yeah, Tom, so I am curious as to what you have coming next in the hopper, what do you have in mind? But a little bit, I also have a question on coming from Silicon Valley, and I worked in Silicon Valley for a while. What has surprised you most about going to a government entity?
Absolutely. So let's take what's next? What are we working on in 2026? Obviously, a successful implementation of the drop system because it's so much out there, continuing to raise awareness. And we really want to build out the set of privacy tips on the privacy.ca.gov website for Californians or people. Obviously, we don't block the website for people in Europe or the rest of the United States. So definitely check it out. And if you guys have feedback on how we can enhance and provide more tips to consumers to get better control of their privacy. Now, we're also unique in that we're an independent agency that we can actually sponsor and support legislation. Last year, it was the Opt-Me-Out Act, which added the browser signal that requires the vendors to add that starting January 1, 2027. This year, we have a couple of proposals. And so we're right now in the process of finding authors of the bill. So we're also trying to build on top of this big Lego block and add more capabilities. And so you'll be hearing more about that. So please expect, and people should expect, additional legislative proposals. There's also in the area of regulations. Now, we came out with that very large automated decision-making, risk assessment, cybersecurity audit regulatory package. It kicks in January 1st, 2026. So we want to make sure that businesses can operationalize those regulations. So we're going to do a lot of evangelism to businesses, telling them what's in the regulations, what's expected of them as well. But we're also going to propose new regulations in a couple areas. One area is that we want to streamline privacy policies. Another area is that we want to reduce friction as it relates to people exercising their privacy rights, looking at things of how can we optimize the usage of authorized agents, for example, in the context of Californians exercising their privacy rights. And so those are some of the areas that we're going to also look to do from a regulatory perspective. And then finally, we're going to continue to build out our enforcement capabilities. And so we've really ramped up over the last 6-8 months under my tenure, the enforcement actions that we have, including having a specialized task strike force associated with data brokers that have not fully registered. But also we're going to continue to look at CCPA violations. And we had our first 7-figure fine, but it's not just about the fine. We're also looking to make sure that businesses change their practices. And so if you look at the enforcement actions they've done, it requires businesses to, in one case, actually hire a UX designer to make sure that consumers can correctly exercise their privacy rights. It requires them to support the GPC. In a couple cases with data brokers, one of which decided, based on our enforcement activities, to actually exit the California market because they were selling some super sensitive information. And another data broker earlier last year decided to actually shut down. And they were advertising that we will sell you scary information about people. Basically, they were promoting that this is a site that you could dox people. So that's another area. A big area of focus, of course, is on the enforcement. So you got enforcement, you got regulations, you got policy and legislation, and then, of course, the public affairs, raising awareness and literacy, and then finally the drop system. So those are the 5 areas that we're really focusing on in 2026.
Love it. If you could do something about the class action lawsuits under the Wiretap Act, I know a lot of businesses would appreciate you for that one. Has nothing to do with the privacy law and everything to do with the Wiretap Act that is woefully out of date. But with that, I know that we are coming close to the end of our program. So, Ralph, Paul, did y'all have any last questions for Tom?
I've got one that Tom may or may not want to answer.
Okay, that's been our program today. Thank y'all for...
In all genuineness, AI is the word on everybody's lips. In fact, we did a little thing over Christmas, and one of the statistics that came out of our podcast was the word that was said most often during 2025.
Go figure.
So I know in the US, there's been some conversations about AI laws in California and preemption and the moratorium from a federal level. Now, you made some public comments on that, I'm sure, but we talked about your relationship between state and federal level. Perhaps for our listeners across the globe who may not have been keeping up, what is the state AI laws in California compared to the federal level?
Well, California has historically led the United States in consumer protection laws. And so it started over 100 years ago with food safety. We saw it with automobile emissions and standards that have led the nation. We were the first state to have a data breach notification law. We were the first state to have a comprehensive privacy law. And we're the only state and only entity in the world to have this accessible deletion mechanism, which we call the drop system as well. So the reality is it's called the California effect. It's not the Tom Kemp effect. It's really a California effect. And that's predated me. This has been going on for 100 years. And there was Justice Brandeis. He talked about how states can be the laboratories of democracy. And because of the rapid ability, because we have this, again, I call it a big Lego piece, which is the CCPA, that sets a high floor and allows people to add on top of it. What we're seeing is rapid innovation happening as it relates to privacy. And that has also started happening here with respect to artificial intelligence, because there is a significant desire by legislators in California to not make the same mistakes that happened by not regulating social media. And there's been significant societal harm, according to the lawmakers, that have occurred. I think we're now seeing some of the harms with AI, with the chatbots and the impact on kids, et cetera. So our message, as most Californians talk about when we do talk to our federal colleagues, is that any laws as it relates to AI or privacy should not be a ceiling, but should be a floor and should allow states to continue to be a laboratory of democracy. Now, then people say, then you get a patchwork, blah, 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 blah. The reality is, in the United States, if you look at various more vertical or industry sector specific federal privacy laws, the vast majority of states just keep the base floor. Only a few states go over and beyond that, and it's manageable. Like that happened with HIPAA, for example. California goes a little bit over and beyond HIPAA with its own laws, but probably other states just say it's HIPAA right there. And no one's like with pitchforks talking about this patchwork, blah, 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 blah. So we are very active and very aggressive of trying to raise awareness with legislators that people have rights here in California that they don't have in other parts of the United States. And do you want to be in a business of taking away innovative rights that people have been given? And don't you want to be able to continue to allow states to be able to innovate? Because unfortunately here in the United States, there's significant dysfunction that happens and has happened at the federal level. And frankly, we haven't had a major piece of privacy legislation in 25, 30 years, right? We're still on COPA version 1.
Been a while.
And given the rapid change and pace of AI development, we can't lock ourselves in amber like an insect from Jurassic Park stuck still in amber right there, because we need to be able to protect our citizens from harms, be it privacy harms or harms associated with artificial intelligence. And so we strongly are against trying to preempt or place moratoriums on common sense laws that protect consumers.
I love that.
That sounds like a perfect note to end on. Thank you very much, Tom, for joining us.
We appreciate it.
And thanks to our listeners for joining us. That's all for this week. Until next week, goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, y'all.
Now that was serious privacy. Please subscribe on your favorite podcast app and leave us a review. You can find us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Blue Sky as Serious Privacy. Feel free to drop us a question or a comment. We'd love to hear from you.
If you're a data protection or privacy professional, you already know the pressure. Non-stop regulatory change, AI oversight, internal demands, and the expectation to somehow stay ahead of it all. And the old patchwork of tools just isn't cutting it anymore.
No. That's why TrustArc created a modern privacy management platform powered by Arc Intelligence. The TrustArc platform brings your workflows, evidence, research, tasks, and applications all together in one unified and intelligent workspace so you don't waste time digging, clicking, or context switching.
With Ask Arc, your privacy assistant, you can ask plain language questions about laws, jurisdictions, or even your own program data, and get credible, cited answers based on NIMBY research and more than 1,000 global laws. It's explainable, transparent, and purpose-built for data protection and privacy.
So if you need to add a vendor, create a cookie banner, or start an assessment, quick actions take formally complex tasks, turn them into bite-sized guided workflows to save you time.
It's a platform that thinks like you, works like you, and helps you move faster with confidence, whether you're a seasoned DPO or you're just getting started.
See how modern privacy gets done. Explore Arc at trustarc.com/serious-privacy. That's trustarc.com/serious-privacy.